time of year when we recognize everyone and we just get together and celebrate the holidays and celebrate the fact that we own this wonderful building, and so much has happened with it in the last year. I encourage everybody to walk around the place if they haven't been here in a while or not been here at all, and check out our new Hall of Fame room in the back, and our control room, and the television display, and the ham shack downstairs. We've really done a lot in the last year, and we're very proud of it. So I'm going to yak some more later, but without further ado, we're going to introduce Mr. John Stuart, who has played a major part in the restoration of our NBC Chime machine here, as well as John Staples. So I'll turn it over to John Stuart for a while.
I cut off the credits. John Staple sprung the video on me, so he did the video and the editing, and said, gave me the mic, or put the mic on my lapel and says, tell me about it. So I was able to, I had just been doing a lot of research on it at the time, so I was able to do that without a whole lot of without any notes. So this is what I'm going to go through. Is a bunch of pictures here. The video obviously tells you everything you want to know or need to know. So here we go. So the as you saw in the pictures, the machine itself has lots of wear and tear on it. It is serial number 2. The serial number 1 is located in a private collection. Well, actually, it's being donated to a radio museum back in, I think, West Virginia. But it's located right now in Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C. And we've been corresponding with, he believes, and I agree with him, serial number 1, it was in the New York studio. So it was mounted in a rack mount. In the back is a frame, which I think was part of the standard studio equipment bay. They used to put lots of amplifiers and other circuit breaker boxes and that kind of stuff in these standard racks. So I think NBC provided the housing, and then the Ranger Tone company custom built the inside. And you'll see later some evidence of how these were custom built, and we think only about a dozen were built. Swinging around back, you can see the motor and that radio, or the hum control. So our first goal here, our first challenge, was how to get it to run. On the bench you saw in the video, I believe John Staples had a screwdriver pushing down on a relay while I held something else in the power supply, so it was 3 out of 4 arms were in operation there. So fortunately, through another source, we had some documentation which was hanging around here somewhere. We had a schematic of the amplifier, and down on the bottom is a schematic of the motor control. So there's not much there except the motor starter and a release cam, terminology like setup and release. We're still trying to figure out, we know what it does, but interesting studio technology. And this is an inner studio wiring diagram having to do with chimes. So obviously we didn't want to duplicate that and settle on a simpler circuit down the bottom down here, and a couple of relays. So anyway, I built this little relay system. Basically it's a run relay and then a stop relay. There's the documentation if you want to study it beforehand. Set this up at a test bench at home. So here I'm using a Heathkit power supply, a little mixer, getting the thing to sequence through, not overshoot. So that took a while. Then the next project then was to get the audio output amplified. enough and not too much. So it turns out the audio out of the vacuum tube is about a minus 28 dB full scale, or dBu actually, same, close enough. It's pretty soft. It's softer than a record player phono. It's louder than a microphone. So I couldn't get enough volume into a single stage amplifier. 30 dB of gain was not enough. So we were looking at a preamplifier, and it got kind of messy. I tried it with a little 8-inch and then a 10-inch loudspeaker, and discovered, of course, that without a speaker enclosure, it sounded like, terrible. There was no fidelity to it. The speaker there sounded pretty good. That's a little JBL speaker, so I wasn't going to stick a JBL speaker in there. So that's, and it still needed an amplifier with more gain than the one on the bench there. So that was a fun part of the research. I ran across this product. I had some experience with these about 10, 20 years ago. They're made for public address speaking. I think it's rated at 50 watts, 103 dB output, 1 meter away. So they're loud little suckers. 4-inch woofer and get this, a 10 millimeter tweeter. 10 millimeter, and it's ferrometallic cooled, which is a liquid, I don't know, something. Anyway, they got a good reputation, and it worked, as you'll hear, perfect. During that benchtop testing, we discovered that one of the notes kind of hung, had a sustain that kept going, and so looked into how that worked and see if I could fix it. So here's a view of looking in from the back, and you see the three, in the video I call them fingers. I think we can change our terminology to reeds. So they're vibrating reeds, are those three dark blocks with several of the reeds missing. Under those reeds you can barely see this damping felt pad. So like on a piano, when you strike the strings, you got to stop it when you release. And so the Ranger Tone Company had to build this into their, most music box of course don't have this, but so this felt pad comes up when so directed. There's the pad out with the spring that holds it down, and then on this drum, besides the sets of 8 fingers that trip the reeds, there are another cams that come around and hit those fingers that stick out underneath, and those are levers which push up on the dampers. So plays the notes, and this is all specified on one of these drawings we have around here somewhere, how many rotations of the motor between each of these actions. And so they were able to time when they get dampened and where they let them run. So I got rid of most of the sustained tone there, but not all of it. Since I had to take one of these reeds off to clean that thing, Steve's pretty proud of that. He mounted this. Yeah. You can see the prototype hand-built evidence there of the multiple holes, and they tried different things in there where they built serial number 2. So you can, on the 2 on the left, you can see where the pads are underneath. And what I did to clean those up was basically wash with a detergent. I read about felt, and the felt says don't use hot water, because it'll shrink. I didn't want to use any degreaser, but this did a detergent, so that worked pretty good. And as you saw back here in the picture, the cleaned up pad looks a lot better than it did. So some of you are asking, you took the reeds off there? Yes, I did. Will I do it again? Probably not. But that's what it looks like on the bottom. Now notice the 2 on the left there seem to have a little bridge. I'm pretty sure that wasn't solder. I think I cleaned it out with a piece of paper. But notice along the bottom of those reeds hanging down that there's a kind of a well-machined rectangular box, and then on top is the glob of solder. It almost makes me suspect that they had it tuned for a higher octave, and a lot of the hand chimes were at a higher octave for the NBC. And I was somewhat surprised when we measured that this one started at a lower octave. So maybe the NBC engineers added all those solder blobs because they wanted a more, well, the lowest frequency was what, 200 hertz?
Just about.
Yeah, so which is perfect for the old AM radio band. You got that audio voice spectrum. Here's a side view, and you can more clearly see how this thing was machined. Also notice the little swirl marks. So when I saw those, I said that looks like a milling machine that built this old block, and of course then they hardened it so it will ring like a chime. So if that was needed to be rebuilt, that's kind of how you go down the path, machining it and including the reeds, and then you would harden the thing to twang like a music box. Okay, also we received with the chime machine the clock you see in the front there. So that has a nice NBC clock on it and some buttons and a couple of lights. And the back, it surprisingly had this big hunk of 4-inch pipe, which we kind of suspected and then was a shield of a convenient size. So that's what they housed it in. I took all this apart and found a lot of masking tape in there. Drafting tape. I'm assuming it was drafting tape. Having been old enough to have drafting tape on my workplace at work, and the NBC engineers who built this had a lot of more drafting tape, I'm sure, than they did 3M electrical tape back in the 20s. So that was wrapped quite a bit to fill the gap between the clock and the 4-inch pipe. Looking right at us here on the edge, you see it looks like a Band-Aid. That's a point where they had to grind off some of the motor armature or field plates. And if those plates were touching the 4-inch pipe, it made a great buzzer, as I found out when I put it back together. So I had to grind off a little more rather than to put 3M electrical tape in. Yeah. Interesting thing on this thing, clock was the motor drive is at a 45-degree angle to the clock axis. So for some reason, the reason is that that made it fit right into a 4-inch pipe. Anyway, nice little clock. At first it did hum or have a lot of gear noise. Then I reasoned, well, it probably ran 30 or 40 years in one position. What happens if I run it a couple of days upside down? Will the grease redistribute inside the sealed canister there on it's on a 45-degree slope? And it seemed to have worked, so couldn't open it up. So that's the clock, and one of the buttons, the button under the studio logo there, is the one that makes it run. Power supply. John Staples contributed this little piece of work. He found this blank chassis, fairly unusual, new old stock, I guess, somewhere around Radio Central here, and a few other parts he scrounged.
Seth found it for us.
Okay, great Seth.
It's done for me.
So anyway, John did a design here with a rectifier tube and a hum balance pot and a light bulb that runs at half of winding, so some neat features in here. And punched some holes, and a little, 24 hours later, he had a power supply. Brought it over to my place, and we hooked it up, and it worked the first time, of course. So the only bad news is we couldn't feature it in an obvious spot, so it ends up in the bottom. Now, I thought I had a picture in here. Maybe it'll pop up here later. Okay, so the other thing, of course, was how to mount it for the public to look at, admire, and play with. More importantly, not so much for the public to play with it, but all the members to be able to demonstrate it to people who come through the museum on tour. So In that respect, there is a timer in the back here, which I'm going to reset. It's like a bathroom timer, goes for 30 minutes, so the idea that normally it would time out and power down. So you crank that on, it goes tick, 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 and so you do that, and within 15 or 20 seconds, it's ready to go. So we'll get there in a second. So as you remember, this thing, you know, with a cover on it, is not very attractive because they used to live in these walls of rack stuff. So I have yet to find a picture of one. The one on the left has similar covers. The handles up there. This one had that back cover, which was why I think it was a standard rack unit type NBC product. So my first, well then I found these pictures of the announcer's delights is what they call these consoles, and thought about, you know, putting the chime in the bottom of one of these because we had the clock and we had to have a podium that people could use to talk about it. But that didn't seem like a very good museum type thing, and Steve said let's put it on something by itself. I came up with this concept, buying a piece of furniture, and you can see that, but Steve wanted something more like a professional museum pedestals. And as I looked into where you get a pedestal, it's a big business. There's companies that make these things for everybody that has the, you know, the china vase at home they want to put out in the foyer, to museums that want to put a 50-pound music box on top. So lots of pedestals of different sizes and compositions. Ended up with a local company building this out of starboard plastic. Starboard is like ABS plastic. It's a little tougher, and UV resistant, and they did a beautiful job. I had done some drawings that show the dimensions and the cutouts and some internal shelves. So we ended up with what you see in front of you. In the back there's access to a couple of shelves for the amplifier and the relays, and the power supply is down at the bottom, nice and comfy. And we're also, for all you folks, the youngins in the crowd, I'm going to bury inside of this tomb the covers that came off the front and the cover with a handle, so they don't get separated from the machine. So another thing to splash up this display, we thought it'd be great to bring in the NBC logo. So that was what we modeled this drawing after, and how to mount it. I found some characters online. Evidently, this is another big business. Pedestals you talk about, architectural characters, signs, huge business nationwide. So this outfit was able to had a font that matched the original stuff I found on the microphone. This was over here somewhere. And anyway, they've had these made and then made it into a front cover there with some steel. So I assembled all that, and it's ready to go. So with that, because we're going to play.
John?
Yep.
Let's get a celebrity or somebody to press the button. Susan, you, go press the button for us.
I'm a celebrity now, huh?
Press the studio button there.
The one that says
Right below
studio?
studio, yeah.
Thank you. All that for a 3-note encore, huh? Okay, a couple of at the end. Most of you had received the journal, but if you're visiting, we have some of these that you could either talk us out of or buy or whatever. But there's a huge article that John Staples and I wrote about the chime machine, so that's more information. And these are 3 websites that, instead of trying to remember a website, you might be able to remember what to Google. So there's a ton of information about this whole subject available at those sites. Thank you.
December 14th, our youngest member is having a birthday today. So Chris Chapman, happy birthday to you. How many years? 16. So he's been driving, and he's been coming here and doing a lot of good volunteer work for us. So happy birthday to Chris. And did I hear something about a cake?
Cupcakes.
Cupcakes. We're gonna have some cupcakes later in honor of Chris's birthday.